Pantheon is changing. Like really freaking changing. I think that over the last couple weeks and months, one thing we can say for certain is that the game that you may have logged out in is going to be very different from the game that you will be logging back into once all of these changes come in, with the only real big question being, are these changes good? We already knew with the big spring update they were going to be unifying mob types and they were going to be doing a wipe that would get rid of everybody's characters because there were just so many changes happening and it was going to be kind of remaking a lot of the game. And I was ready for a lot of changes, but I think I kind of even underestimated just how many things were going to change. And I was already excited with all the changes that were coming in because I thought some of them were really necessary. I thought they were needed to kind of reinvigorate the game and kind of smooth out some of the roughness. Some of the things that I had initially been against, I realized that I was fucking wrong because I'm wrong a lot. Yeah, believe it or not, I'm just a YouTuber after all. Thank God I'm not a game dev. But as we have been waiting for this update to drop, we just got a really big announcement that I think puts a lot of things in perspective, and it kind of shows that Pantheon is shifting on this continuum. If we just like break down MMOs into a very oversimplified line where you have EverQuest on this side and World of Warcraft on this side, and you just kind of shift it a little bit, it's shifting a little bit more towards classic World of Warcraft. I want to be very clear here that I'm talking about classic World of Warcraft and not the current World of Warcraft here, but it's a little shift in that direction, though still firmly on the side of EverQuest. After all, any game where you die and cry yourself to sleep because of all the experience you just lost, I don't think you can really count that in World of Warcraft. But there is enough changes that I thought I should do this video because we really need to go over it so that you know what the hell is happening and what's going on by the time you log back in. The impetus for this video was a new article that dropped on April 24th called Combat and Progression More Features. This outlined a lot of the quality of life changes that are coming with the big update, like First to Engage. If you played EverQuest or any old school MMO, you know that one of the hallmarks of those games is competition for mobs. This was handled in a not always great way with essentially a might is right DPS race. Whoever did 51% of the total damage to a mob wins, winner take all. This applied to groups, raids, or solo. Sometimes this resulted in heart-pounding, thrilling chases, but more often than not, it was rage-inducing kill stealing. We all know that's how it was. Yes, there were the DPS races that were fun and exciting, but mostly it was might is right kill stealing. The more powerful player or players were able to monopolize content, or the more DPS focused class was able to. A wizard was going to outdo a cleric or a warrior, for example, in a solo fight for experience on a mob. A more DPS heavy group would do better against a more balanced group or a less optimized group. A Zerg raid with more DPS would win against a smaller raid. There's positives and negatives to this approach, but it was the approach for decades. And I will fully admit that I was part of a guild that benefited at times from this DPS race and also lost at times from this DPS race. I have been on both sides of winning and losing the DPS race in competitive EverQuest raiding. I have cried and I have yelled with exultant joy at fucking over other people, so I know both sides here. But it was the only approach in EverQuest specifically until very recently. EverQuest in their progression servers just very recently, with like their most recent progression servers, added a first to engage way of like locking down encounters. Basically, whoever hits the encounter first gets to lock it down. Now, they weren't the first ones to do it. This is not new. There are plenty of other MMOs that have similar systems where you first to engage, you lock down that NPC. It is a kind of a compromise system that maintains having competition for mob types, but also kind of gets rid of that DPS race and instead has a race to tag the mob instead. So it doesn't matter if you have 5 wizard bots, it just matters, are you faster? Pantheon until now had gone with the former, a DPS race, but they're going to instead now move to that first to engage system that sounds a whole lot like what EverQuest has implemented on their progression systems more recently. There is a short delay once an enemy spawns before their enemy can be targeted and attacked, and there's some sort of provision in place that stop players from endlessly kiting NPCs with no intention of killing it but keeping it locked. My guess is some sort of need to maintain some realistic progress toward killing the NPC. This is probably more to prevent players from locking named or raid NPCs while waiting for reinforcements, or to really just stop people from trolling. People will probably find a way around this because people always do find a way around this, but that's just how gaming works. Like I was saying, this sounds like a compromise from the DPS race system and the more recent MMO systems that you find in more casual games that give like kind of a personal kill credit or a split credit system where there's no competition at all and everyone just kind of shares. This still has the competition, but takes away the might is right. Between the two systems, the DPS race and first to engage, they're both imperfect, but I honestly personally prefer first to engage just because I find it a little bit less imperfect. Though it's also a bit more opportunity for bugging out or being exploited with timers or lockdowns, so hopefully get tested thoroughly. The reason why I personally prefer it is I kind of seeing it as evening out the playing field a little bit more than the whole DPS race did, especially in a game that is trying to push class roles instead of trying to make everyone a damn DPS. The next thing they've added is rested experience. If you played World of Warcraft or EverQuest 2, you're probably more familiar with this than EverQuest. Rested experience, or vitality in the case of EverQuest 2. It's straightforward. When you're logged out, you accumulate an experience bonus, so when you log back in, you gain experience faster. It is essentially a catch-up mechanic for players who have less time to play. And I'm fine with it. I think it's helpful to encourage players to come back after a long time away and doesn't really do anything negative to the world unless it's some super huge bonus, which it doesn't sound like it's going to be. There's also some pretty big changes to itemization. One is kind of smaller and I think it's a bad idea, kind of annoying idea. The other one's a much bigger idea and I think it's a really good idea, and I want to talk about both of them. First is bind on equip. In Pantheon, they've been kind of struggling with itemization, at least in my opinion, for quite some time. They've really been kind of pushing into classic EverQuest territory rather than Kunark and Velia's territory. And I want to specify that between the classic EverQuest territory, like having golden Afridi boots and pretty much that only, versus Kunark and Velia's, which actually kind of streamlined and had better stats on everything on itemization. In classic EverQuest, items were really more defined by their extreme rarity rather than their impact, with too much focus on rarity and scarcity and not enough things to really fill in places. Don't get me wrong, I love having rare and extremely rare items, but having only rare and extremely rare items as well as having a slow experience grind gives little to no incentive. For a while, Pantheon had too much incentive in crafting, then they had too much incentive in common loot drops, then they had too little in either of those, but now it sounds like they're coming around to a system that will give them a little more play when it comes to adjusting those, especially when it comes to item economy. That is the bind on equip. It is the WoW system, for lack of a better terminology, even though several other MMOs use this system. It's the no drop system, but with more play because the item is droppable and tradable until it is used once or bound to your character, thus taking it out of the item economy. This lets items be a little bit more common because the general idea is that players will be using the item, thus forever removing the item from the ability to be traded. Like first to engage, it's not perfect because it pisses off two different types of people. First, the people that want to give items to their alts can't have hand down items anymore. And second, people that want items to be more rare will eventually see items getting less and less rare because even if they start out rare because they're being bound on equip, especially when players start using them, the very nature of them initially being tradable and being more common means inevitably the market will be flush versus if they were more rare initially and or completely no drop. Bind on equip is a pretty good bandage though. It doesn't solve the item economy problem, but it does forestall it. It doesn't prevent giving items to alts, but it does cap it. I tend to think this is a step in the right direction in solving what's been a very thorny issue for Pantheon for way too long because there just hasn't been enough things in the game to go and get, and this gives the devs more ability to add those things without the fear of diluting their worth overnight. Basically, it gives the devs more play to do what they want with the item economy without wrecking everything. Again, it's not perfect, but it's a system that works in MMOs. But now let's get to my minor gripe, because it is minor, it's just an annoying little thing. But they are also adding in item color to signify the rarity of the items, and I find this totally unnecessary. From Diablo to World of Warcraft, purple items and yellows and blues, it just feels really gimmicky. I've never personally found it all that attractive. In an ARPG, like Diablo or like Path of Exile, it makes sense. You are flooded with loot. There is a need to see at a glance the rarity of items. That's not the case here. And honestly, it adds to a concern of the aforementioned bind and equip that Pantheon may overcorrect and go too far in that WoW direction and flood items. We go from item deserts where they're just nothing to loot to a point where items become so meaningless unless their name is purple. And then they become meaningless unless their name is yellow. I don't want to only give a shit about my item based on the color of the name. I want to actually look at the item and inspect the item and care about it based on the stats in the item and care that way. I don't need an at a glance care just because there's so many items everywhere. That is essentially the purpose having the colors on items serves. Because there's so many, you can just at a glance see what the rarity is. If you're not getting a shit ton of loot, you don't necessarily need to be color coded. Perhaps this is just an old man yelling at clouds situation for me, but I just don't see this as necessary, and I see it as kind of a thing that is like a hallmark of something that's just like an issue that this game should never have. I might be really fucking bad at math, but at the same time, I don't need my items color coded for me to tell me what to wear. Let me make my own bad combos based on my own bad decisions. But the next feature is definitely a much requested feature, and it's one that's been requested, I think, for as long as the game has been in early access. And it's finally coming, and that's the mail system. Funnily enough, it's coming with the buy not equip change, because one of the reasons why people wanted it was to send things to their alts. The game will be getting a mail system that is capable of sending items and coin using a mail courier or a mail kiosk in-game for a fee to valid people on your friends list, your guild, or your own characters. The mail system allows players to safely and securely transfer items between their own characters. The mail system is how you'll receive items that you purchase from the market, which we'll talk about here in just a second. The mail system is also how you might receive items from Visionary Realms as part of account rewards, or any other scenario where they might need to send in-game items to players for some reason. I can think of a couple of reasons, like if items get deleted or whatever reasons. But basically it will be a system in the game that will actually have a cost to it, so there will be some kind of cost involved in all of it, so a little bit of a money sink. But like I mentioned, the market, this actually segues very nicely into that change, because that's a big one. Until this point, Pantheon has operated with a spam the auction style peer-to-peer trading system. And that's obviously still possible, but will likely be completely replaced by an auction house style market like you would see in EverQuest 2, World of Warcraft, etc. The dominant system in MMOs today. This is a sea change, and probably a bit further in the quality life side of things than some of us wanted to see. Now, I personally advocated for the Lineage 2 style PC vendors or the Ultima Online Star Wars Galaxy style NPC vendors, but those are both much more involved and come with a whole host of other problems. The downside to adding a full functional market now is that you can't really go back. Like, you can't add this and later say, okay, now that we have time, we're actually gonna add in NPC vendors and player homes and use the market like Star Wars Galaxy's market. You can't go back. You cannot go back from a player market house. You can't go back. You cannot go back from an auction house because it is just too convenient. But I say that, and I'm not saying it like this is a bad thing, because I much prefer this to the alternative of the spamming of OOC channels and auction channels. I know there are some people that are very, very passionate about having that common land style version of like sitting out there and talking to each other and having those kind of experiences. I personally don't have any social memories of the person that I bought level 20 spells from, or the person who scammed me on golden Afridi boots. I don't remember their names. I don't think of that as a social interaction that was worth having. It's just not something that I think of as a really positive memory, aside from just how cool it was seeing so many people in one place. And that was, I admit, pretty damn cool. That did make the game feel alive, seeing that many people in one place. And that does go away when you add in an auction house. But the negative with that is you exclude a large portion of the player base from the economy, because there will be a large portion of the player base that does not have the time nor the will to engage in that kind of economy. They will not spend the precious time they have, which may be 20, 30 minutes, an hour a day, to play the game. They will be unwilling to spend that precious little time sitting and trying to sell or buy things when they could be actually playing the game. So I think like this actually allows them to actually engage in the market in a way they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So again, I know that this is probably one of the more controversial things for a lot of people. I still see this as a net positive. There are a few other things I want to rattle off real quick from the letter that don't need their own section. Charm is finally coming in. There will be spell pushback, like when you get hit, your spells get pushed back in their casting, and bane damage items, which made me perk up because the example given was finding a dagger of spider slaying that does additional damage to spiders. Not since Ultima Online have I really had a game where I actively sought out bane damage weapons outside of a raid context. Yes, we all remember in EverQuest trying to have to get the freaking Shisar banes for the damn raid so that you could actually participate in the raid. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is getting these weapons, like weapons of slaying, like silver weapons in Ultima Online, that were just things you sought out for your own use, for your daily use, because they were good and they were helpful. And I really hope Pantheon is looking at it that way and not just for like some like simple, like one single use thing. So I actually hope that Pantheon is looking at this as like something worthwhile and not just like a little gimmicky thing. Another thing that I think a lot of people will be happy about is there going to be hotbar simplification. This is a long requested thing from a lot of people. They'll be consolidating the hotbar types, which if you have played the game, you understood what goes where between techniques and utilities and action abilities, but it was confusing and really limiting. I don't know what this means for the limited action completely going forward, but it seems like we'll have a lot more play with what we had, being able to put things wherever we want. At least that's how I'm reading this. And we did get an update earlier that mentioned we'll be getting ability loadouts to swap out our limited action sets, so even more flexibility that we can use. Believe it or not though, we're not done because your entire classes are changing. One of the biggest changes to the game is the class changes, specifically Mastery. Mastery has been a system that they've always had in the game on the periphery, and it was briefly in the game a few years ago where it essentially worked as an augmenter system, kind of like AAs, really just making your existing skills stronger. For example, reducing cooldowns or increasing potency, but it wasn't fully implemented and not all skills had it, so it was pulled and inactivated. What will be coming with the changes is an entirely reinvented system that will be giving classes two distinct mastery roles. For example, the Dire Lord will have a tank mastery tree and a DPS mastery tree, allowing for the first time since the early days of World of Warcraft, before they swapped Blood Death Knight to the tank side of things, to have a bloodthirsty DPS role, which I am so fucking excited about. I've wanted that for so long. Just like an evil ass like DPS. I don't know. I just want it. I think it's cool. Initially, I was kind of hesitant here. I even questioned creative director Chris Perkins on a stream we did together about suggesting that this initially eliminates the idea of class roles, because if you have to clarify when you send a tell to a Dire Lord if they're a tank or a DPS, does the Dire Lord itself have a class role anymore? But I've come around to it because the archetype roles still exist. Tank, healer, CC, support, and DPS, the quaternity that the game was built upon, is still very sound and important. And so the only thing I'd be really concerned about is more around class balance and desirability, players still feeling like they want to play a tank or a healer and CC. And honestly, with that CC role, especially adding in charm, I think it'll go a long way in making that feel very worthwhile to a lot of people. I've also come around to the idea of player choice being a good thing, and the idea that this mastery system, trimmed down from originally 3 branches to 2 branches, provides a manageable customization without overwhelming the game or overwhelming balance, at least at first blush. I'm excited to see how this plays out and see how they will make each of these 2 trees feel distinct for each class, and how they will make each of these branches have a distinct class fantasy. And the last major change that I think will be felt by everyone, and one that I think is going to be the most necessary for the game's long-term health, I mentioned at the beginning. Enemies will be moving to a single mob type that will be harder than the current solo NPCs. In doing this, time to kill is going to be going up for these NPCs as well as experience per kill. And this is right up my alley because I've always kind of loathed the idea of spamming low quality kills for infinitesimal experience, because it makes each and every engagement feel less impactful. It honestly kind of makes it feel a little bit like an ARPG in that way. A slower time to kill, but making that feel more rewarding afterward makes each encounter more worthwhile. Experience curves are also getting tweaked, with the last we heard on the matter being a significantly faster experience, especially beyond level 10, where previously there was a pretty dramatic slowdown, especially around 20 plus. Lastly, for traversal, already in game, you can tame your own horses and stable them starting at level 20. Taming works pretty much like how you might expect. There's a little bit of a knack to it. The horses will fight you and you can tire out while taming, and horses themselves have different stats. There are plans to expand mounts in the future, but this does significantly speed up things like corpse runs or traveling across zones, as long as you have a mount while also giving players something new to collect: pretty horses. My name is Revamp Flynn. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day. I think this is going to be great for the game. I think this is going to be a way that kind of differentiates it a little bit from a game like Monsters and Memories, which would be a little bit more classic P99 style, classic EverQuest. And this brings Pantheon to its own little hybrid space in the genre. And I'm kind of really looking forward to it. I have been desperately wanting to jump back into Pantheon, but I'm waiting for that wipe, and I'm waiting for this new look of Pantheon to kind of jump in and play. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much for sticking around for such a long video. I appreciate you.